going to end the event today with Michael Palmer. That was so beautiful. Michael Palmer has been translated into over 25 languages and is himself a translator, including from French. And among other French poets he's worked with, Emmanuel Card has translated Sun, and Palmer has translated Ocar's Theory of Tables. Palmer's recent collections with new directions are The Promises of Glass, Codes Appearing, Company of Moths, and Active Boundaries, Selected Essays and Talks. And he's collaborated extensively over several decades with the Margaret Jenkins Dance Company in San Francisco, where he lives. And we did a long-filmed interview upstairs about poetry and dance with Michael this afternoon, which will appear on our kind of online journal, doublechange.org. We've had 4 issues and a 5th and 6th on the heels. And Omar Berrada of Double Changes is going to start by reading a translation.
This is going to be short. There is a book of Michael Palmer's that is coming out in a few months in French translation. It's one of his early books, First Figure, and it is being, or has been, translated by Éric Sucher and Virginie Poitrasson. And this is just one poem from the book, The Village of Reason, Le Village de la Raison. Ceci, un gant, ou un livre d'un club du livre. Ceci, le soleil, ou une couche de boue. Ceci, lundi. Ceci, un mot altéré. Ceci, le village de la raison. Et ceci, un œil arraché. Ceci le père, ou un nombre sur un tableau. Ceci un substitut. Ceci la chose que tu es. Ceci une peinture vernie, ou autrement une réponse acceptée. Ceci la porte, et ceci le mot pour porte. Ceci un réflexe causé en tombant, et ceci un prisonnier avec une orange. Ceci un nom que tu connais, et ceci, le poison pour te faire aller bien. Ceci, le mécanisme, et ceci, l'ombre d'un pont. Ceci, une courbe, et ceci, sa soif. Ceci, lundi. Ceci, son mot abîmé. Ceci, la trace, et ceci, le terme sans marque. Ceci, le sonnet, et ceci, sa maison brûlante. Tu es dans ce jeu. Tu es son paysage. C'est une hypothèse, la longueur d'un bras. Ceci, un coquelicot. Ceci, un épilogue.
In that is a thing called the Baudelaire series. And in translating the Baudelaire series, Emmanuel found a tone that he wanted to take off from for this work that became Theory of Tables of his. The translation came about because I was in New York, again, some years ago, which is many years ago, and then young poet named Stacey Doris came up to me, and in a very soft voice, which I can't possibly reproduce, but is typical of Stacey, she said, Emmanuel has asked if you would be willing to translate a few pages of his book called Theory of Tables. And I said, well, I'd be happy to look at it. And if I think I can, I will translate it. And so I translated a few pages. And then sometime later, Stacey, possibly in San Francisco this time, or in Paris, I forget where, said, Emmanuel is wondering whether you would be willing to translate the rest of his book called Theory of Tables. And I was happy to do that. and it's a beautiful book. But as I began to translate it, it sounded suspiciously a bit like myself. And I thought, this is not the mark of a good translator. Then I realized, of course, he was doing a kind of octave doubling, to use a musical term, with my voice, and creating a kind of a circuit, a metaphor for the process of conversation that is both translation and both this sort of international exchange that had become so intimate among all of us, many of us. So I'll begin with a few poems from that section of Sun. Then I'll read just a few poems of Emmanuel's from Theory of Tables from my translation, which he decided was the definitive edition of Theory of Tables. He asked, I don't think it ever happened, but he asked his publisher in Paris to allow Théorie des Tables to go out of print, since he decided that Theory of Tables should exist in English. Anyway, the story goes on after that, but we don't have time for that. So I'll read some poems from the Baudelaire series, a few. And then a few of my translations of Emmanuel's book. And then I'll read a little selection of poems from my new manuscript that New Directions is publishing in the spring called Thread. 100 years ago I made a book, and in that book I left a spot, and on that spot I placed a seam with the mechanism of the larynx around an inky center leading backward, forward into sun snow, then to frozen sun itself. Threads and nerves have brought us to a house, and clouds called crescent birds are a lifting song. No need to sail further, protesting here and there against some measures across the years of codes and names. Always immortal as long as you remain a man, eating the parts of him indicated by the prophets, stomach, skull, and gullet, bringing back the lost state. Yes, I just dreamed another dream, and nobody was in it. Words say, misspell and misspell your name. Words say, leave this life. From the singer streams of color, but from you, a room within a smaller room, habits of opposite and alcove, Eros seated on a skull as on a throne. Words say, Timaeus, you are time. A page is edging along a string. Never sleep, never dream in this place. And altered words say, O is the color of this name, full of broken tones. Silences we mean to cross one day. It is good. This one from the Baudelaire series is drawn from thinking about a relatively early book of Oliver Sacks called Awakenings, which probably some of you are familiar with. They also made a film of it. And I quote some of the people who awakened under the drug therapy that was administered to them after sometimes a sleep of many, many years. You say, a miracle from heaven. You say, I'm fine, I'm really going blind, gay as a skylark today. You say, I have an ache or a pain in me, in my body inside. I'm fine, I'm really going blind. It's a joy to be alive. I had a visitor tonight with suit and beard and Malacca cane, climbed through my window and entered me. Is this such a bad thing? Is this a thing at all? Each evening there's a poppy in my brain, which closes before dawn. Whatever happened will not happen again. Please move my arm. And this one is an overwriting of Rilke's Orpheus, Eurydice, Hermes. Where Orpheus descends to retrieve Eurydice, with Hermes as the messenger between the two worlds, one of his guises, and Eurydice doesn't recognize him anymore. So it's in these voices. She says, into the dark, almost a question. She says, don't see things, this bridge, don't listen. She says, turn away, don't turn and return, count no more lines into the poem. Or could you possibly not have known how song broke apart while all the rest watched? That was years ago. Don't say things. You can't say things. The ground is smooth and rough, dry and wet. Pull the blue coat tighter around you. There are 3 parts to you. I'm not the same anymore. I'm not here where I walk, followed by a messenger confused. He's forgotten his name. I'm not here as I walk, not anyone on this path, but a figure walking, a figure projected exactly this far, followed by the messenger, confused. He's forgotten his name. Don't say his name for him. Don't listen to things. You can't listen to things. Some stories unthread what there was. Don't look through an eye thinking to be seen. Take nothing as yours. I am an architect in Vienna, dead and a writer in a blood-red bed. I eat with a fork the meat, the violin. I've let go my practice of this violin. In Vienna there are no musicians. Is my violin broken again, I asked at age 9.10. So then I sat down and was going to get rid of this violin. I can't play it for beans anyway. I'm an architect in a town of architects, no buildings. All my brother architects are dead or else asleep with their sisters in bed. Call me Eric, whose grandfather mended the violin, whose mother once taught him to hate the violin and play dead. I've designed a circle and a bridge. My tears are for the person I miss, the down on her leg. Brown, green, and black. Don't say the fragments of glass are the words or are like the words of the poem. Dear B, forget the words. Don't count the years. Don't think you're holding in your hand the pieces of the poem, time. Don't write that color contains history. These pebbles don't say a G and C on envelopes. These shards aren't syllables. These envelopes don't contain letters. Don't dream that you suffocate each night. 2. The name of the island is invisible. Clean the lens, wash the pebbles in the sea, an idea of the poem. Hello, Olivier. Where are you headed? At 5, I photographed this palm tree for you. The pebbles don't become part of any field. Work from the point of the absence of field. Consult the bits of glass, the remains of the tower. The glass can be endlessly recycled. Expose the negative to the light, wash the print. Envelopes are tables. 3. Your name is invisible. How to say I and not say I. How to say you to you. You don't recognize your voice when you speak. Your language is not yours. Clarify that in translation. Dear V, take what you have at hand, sort what there is on a table. Toss the pebbles in a bowl. Color appears in the water. Don't sort out I and you. Don't sort out blue and a G and C. 4. Schist and marble, 2 colors, white and gray, for the houses. Reeds for the bedding and floors. seaweed, reeds, earth, and goat hides for the verandas, wildwood and glass for the apertures, whitewash for the outside stairs. Hello, Anna. Don't discuss emotion except in terms of tremors. The expansion of the house begins with the house itself. 5. You say the wind has shifted. This ship is seeking new anchorage. You say, have you noticed that people naked are fatter than those in clothes? You say Kasparov is a copy of Fischer, but Fischer was stronger at the same age. I'll go back and bathe when I finish this chapter. You spend your nights at the Barbarossa watching Carlos drink coffee. You say he needs from a day to a month to complete a fine miniature. You always drink huge amounts of water and coffee. You say it's utterly inexplicable. There was no reason for Bobby Fischer to quit chess. Thread. And the final section of the book is a poem in a poem sequence or a poem in maybe each. I think I conceived of each of these little poems as a stanza of a larger room, and I'll read from Thread. It was written around the time of the thinking in the grim ending of the Bush years about the betrayals and the lies and the unaccounted for torture and slaughter that was going on of civilians and others. And into this come a number of figures whom I address, such as Raúl Zurita, the great Argentinian poet, who was at the same time, or a little bit earlier, trying to come to terms with the period in Argentina of the generals that disappeared, the dropping of people from helicopters into the sea and so on. And it was in particular Zurita whose voice inhabits this, but you'll also hear Mahmoud Darwish and Alexei Parshakov, Alyosha Parshakov, who is a wonderful Russian poet, more or less contemporary of mine, who translated me and who I've translated. So it's a kind of threads of different voices passing through a kind of, I suppose, labyrinth. It begins in the Juan Miró Museum in Barcelona, where I was looking at these works, Nighthawk and Sunbird by Miró, these sculptures, and then also drawings of the same thing. Nighthawk and Sunbird, beauty of the world, beauty of the world. How can one write beauty of the world? Fumbled for each other in the dark, familiar, unfamiliar, the touch of watery air, walls, weight of watery air, cards scattered across a table, game of chance they had played. Again, Alyosha, this Alexei Parshakov, this was written for him as a kind of elegy about 18 months after he died. So, Alyosha, maybe it is true that we live in perhaps the earth, perhaps the sky, chemical winds, auroras, tides, chalk hills and blistered pines, and the microtonal bells. And those who swallow ink, the ringers of bells, perhaps they will inherit the bogs and salt marshes, the swamp grass and samphire, jacket with torn pockets, shredded cuffs. Will inherit the sea foam, the dust, the ferrous mud that reabsorbs us. From the mercury fountain, Mahmoud spills a stream, echo of things, sun to stone, speaking, cicada to poppy, not milk of paradise, no river of stars in the dark, just the bent wheel of days, meaningless ripples in the heat. From the eyeless mountains, Raoul, fall voices beneath voices. We hear the hawthorn, the penstemon, the goldenrod. Even here, hawthorn and goldenrod, shadows of wheeling turns, mountains, then sea, sea swallowing mountains. We hear the tongues of days, names melting into sea, wave mouths in different air. Even here, lodestar, lexicon, labyrinthos. Along the corridors of the invisible world, Raoul, gardeners raise such flowers as need no light, such flowers watered by voices as need no eyes to be seen. It is the role of the lovers to set fire to the book. In the palm garden at night, they set fire to the book and read by the light of the book. Syllables, particles of glass, they pass back and forth in the dark. The two, invisible, transparent in the book, their voices muffled by the book. It is the role of the lovers to be figures of the book, the illegible book, changing as the pages turn, now joined, now clawing the fruit from each other's limbs, now interlaced, now tearing at throat and vein, then splayfoot, then winged, then ember, as the music of the book, rustling through the palms, instructs. Robin here is a poet named Robin Blazer. He wrote early on a serial poem called The Moth Poem, and I have a book called Company of Moths, so that's the moth reference. The moth, Robin, we both learned at different times from its motion, a quantum of nothing, could we say, dusk to dark morning before full day, a battering of wings, night notes sounding beyond our extinction. Circling lost through the narrow streets of the old city among the shuttered shops, they hear nothing but the howling of dogs drifting down from the hills above, from the dark of the parched hills, threnos, thread, lament, barely vibrating web of sleep's winding streets. Even in dreams, Roberto, the police. We must count in Babylon. Surely in Babylon we must count the days and the dead, the chambers of the palace, its stones, its steps, its flaring lamps, must count the clouds, the petals of the flowers, the hours. We must count the hours as they pass, so slowly for the young, so swiftly for the withered masters of this place, ardent assassins of speech hidden away. Surely in Babylon we must count the gardens tended, the towers raised by slaves in this city soon to be dust. Count the days and the dead. Must we count the dust? Nighthawk and sunbird, who will tell of it? Shore's eyelid, earth's rim, light from extinguished stars, bathing us in time's wake, time's long stream of slaughter and song. Some love the one more, some the other. Ave Manes, a spectre appeared in my dream, a shade with vulture bone flute, calling to his dead, his unwept, unremembered dead among the terraced hills and stubble fields, his needlessly dead in the rusting sands, his comically dead with lolling tones, Lorca's fluted bones, threaded among the nameless, the recent and the distant, wind and water tossed, dead stars beneath stones, in nomine patri, and of the sun, and of the piping, the signifying ghost, ghost of pentacles, ghost of music halls, spider-legged, spider-white ghost, his ancient, broken, unplayable flute. Under the sign of the alphabet, the rain fell up, the bodies in the quarry spoke of the Lord's great hunger, and the Lord's blackened tongue, and they chanted the secret names of the Lord one by one, and the rain fell up, the bodies in the quarry danced, and the sky filled with sand, the color of rust. The blind boys sang, and the dead men danced, and the deaf men heard their chants. Under the sign of the appetites, a rustle of silk, the barest sound, droplet of ink off the blood moon's faint glow, then ripple, then stream, then river of ink, darkest ink, invisible ink, flooded the clouds below, liquid hours below, liquid eyes, dark as ink. And I dreamed we were still alive, dreamed we were not yet born, dreamed we were yet to be. From the Mercury Fountain, Mahmoud, flow the tenses, past, present, future, future past, first and last, daily acts, desires, angels of slaughter and syntax, the zero and the 0 plus 1, deep eyes, slender wrists, coffee and speech, sleeplessness and its dreams, the meadow orchid low within the grass, evening primrose, cadence on the felt of the dice so casually thrown, the tumbled stones, the field of tolling flowers. Tenses of the present, Mahmoud, the impossible present, infinite presence, threading now forward, now back, amidst the shattered symmetries and scattered fictions, between actual river and imagined shore, actual breath of wind through the frayed, half-open curtain, passing so suddenly over them, those years ago, brief flare